Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East Hour. Well, the high holidays are over and we're back to our regular scheduled program of elections in 2 weeks. And these are, I think, the most fateful ones that we've had to date. The contest in these elections is between a group of parties that want Israel to remain a Jewish Zionist country and have its Jewish national character protected and preserved for posterity, and you have another coalition comprised of parties that are willing to renounce or give up Israel's Jewish identity. Some of these parties, like Benny Gantz's party or Yair Lapid's party, are doing it out of hatred for Netanyahu and the right or a lust for power. Some are ideologically committed to post-nationalist and post-Zionist and globalist agenda that rejects Jewish sovereignty and really the sovereignty of any nation state, and that includes Meretz and the Labor Party. Some are Arab or Islamist nationalists that want to wipe Israel out and side with Israel's enemies. And then you have Avigdor Lieberman there who just really hates Netanyahu. So I guess you can put him in the same category of nihilist lust for power and hatred of Netanyahu and Likud and Likud voters. So those are the two blocks as I see them, and the split, the fissure of Israeli society between those who are committed to maintaining our sovereignty and our national rights and those who want to deal with smaller things like who they like and who they don't like. So we're going to be talking this week with Simcha Rothman, a member of Knesset from the Religious Zionist Party. Simcha is an old friend of mine from well before the time that he was in politics, when he was when he established the I think it's called the movement for responsive government. It's a movement for legal reform. He wrote a book about it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about his party, controversies surrounding his party and its religious line, and his views of what needs to be done to reform Israel's legal system. So we'll be doing that later. But I wanted to begin this podcast this week by talking about really three issues that speak not only to the stakes in the election, but really the threats that we're facing, whether from the Marxist left in the West or from our Islamic enemies, and also the opportunities that we have and to a degree we're squandering now because of the government, as we see revolution in the streets of Iran in a really miraculous and extraordinary way. So the first thing that I want to start with is news fresh from, I think, Tuesday morning, which is that Australia's Labor government, led by Anthony Albanese, that came into power in May, just announced that it was going to withdraw Australia's recognition of Western Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Now, you can raise an eyebrow and say, well, what's the big deal? Israel's capital isn't Western Jerusalem, it's unified Jerusalem. But the very fact that Australia in 2018, under Scott Abbott's leadership, the conservative government recognized any part of Jerusalem as Israel's sovereign capital was a major step forward after 70 years of Australian rejection of Israel's right to its capital city, Jerusalem. So that was a big deal. So Tuesday morning, Penny Wong, the progressive foreign minister of Australia's center-left, or really just left government under Albanese, announced that they were rescinding that recognition of Israel's sovereignty over Jerusalem and the fact that Jerusalem, any part of it, is Israel's capital. And they tried to make this seem like it's just nothing. We're just going back to a policy that had been in place until 2018, and it's not a big deal. We still are really good friends with Israel. But this was an extraordinarily hostile act by this Albanese government. And Israel's response to it was really just nothing. Lapid, who's not only our caretaker prime minister, but also our foreign minister, said that he was really disappointed by the move. This isn't a disappointment. This is a hostile act by Australia. It's not just going back to the way things were. Going back to the way things were means you reject Israel's right to its capital city. If you want to just go along to get along after 70 years, you just keep doing what your predecessor did. That's not changing policy. What they're doing here is taking a radical step of hostility towards Israel, and Israel's proper response isn't to say, well, we were disappointed by the move. It's to say, we're removing our ambassador from Australia because this is disgusting. And if we bring him back, we might have him just sit in Sydney or in Perth or any other city because it's completely arbitrary if we get to choose your capital city for you. Maybe they'll just have it out in the outbacks. We'll set up a tent there and say that this is Israel's embassy. Take it or leave it. This is how you view us. This is how we view you. But that's not what happened. He expressed disappointment. Now you could say, well, what could have Israel done? After all, I had on the NewsHour in May, we had a couple of guests on who talked about just how radical Australian politics have become since the COVID pandemic, and just how much things have changed in Australia that enabled the left in Australia to really have a stunning electoral victory. And that's true. This is a very hostile government. We knew it, just as the case in the United States, where you have progressives who have taken over the Democratic Party, which is really just Marxists, and you have Republicans on the other side. So too in Australia, you have on the one side sort of lily-livered conservatives who weren't really clear how to. I'm just setting up the timer so that I don't talk for an hour and 15 minutes with no bathroom breaks, because I can do that. But just as in the United States, you have two camps which have less and less and less common ground between them. In fact, arguably no common ground between them on significant aspects of governance and the way that what it means to be an American. So too in Australia, the split between left and right is pretty profound. So it was clear already in May when Albanese and his progressive cultural Marxist brethren took over from Scott Abbott that we were going to be facing some lean years in our relationship with Australia. But the question is, how do you approach this kind of situation? And the answer is, when you're facing a government that is sort of inherently hostile to you, then you're supposed to manifest strength, and the more strength you project as Israel, the more they're going to be forced to respect you. And what we've seen with the Lapid government and the Bennett government before that, and of course Defense Minister Benny Gantz throughout, is a projection of extraordinary weakness and diffidence and incompetence to defend Israeli sovereignty and Israeli national interests, and also an unwillingness to do so. So that really invites a kind of aggressive action that Canberra just took against Jerusalem this week. Strength begets strength, weakness begets weakness. The more you project an image of weakness on the international stage, the more you invite people to act aggressively and with hostility towards you and your national interests. And this is really what we've seen with Australia. And I think that you can see this more clearly than with what's happening both in Lebanon and in Iran. And I think both of these issues require me to discuss them with you at some length. Last week we received, after a couple of weeks of leaks, mainly from the Lebanese press, about the contents of the gas deal that the Biden administration has mediated between the Lapid-Gantz government and the Hezbollah-controlled, Iran-controlled Lebanese government regarding Israel's territorial waters, Israel's continental shelf and its economic waters, and gas exploration along the borders of those areas and Israel and Lebanon. And it worked out, and the government kept saying that critiques of the deal that were based on these leaked reports from the Lebanese press were completely off the mark, and that people like myself who were criticizing the deal really had no right to speak out because they hadn't seen the text, which was being hidden from the Israeli public, although Hezbollah saw it and in fact negotiated it. We saw the deal. It was released last week, and it reflected pretty much precisely what the Lebanese media had been reporting all along, so that was incorrect. Moreover, what we've learned is really that there's been a collapse of Israel's capacity to defend its national security and national economic interests under this government. And I think it's important to just go through a couple of the points that Israel conceded in this deal in order to explain just how devastating it is for Israel's sovereignty, Israel's national security, Israel's strategic wherewithal, and also for Israel's economic future. So just a little bit of background. So Israel, about 10, 15 years ago, large deposits of national gas were found in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Egyptian, Cypriot, Greek, Israeli, and presumably Lebanese territorial and economic waters. And these countries began exploring the natural gas deposits that were located in their sovereign waters and in their sovereign continental shelves and their economic waters, in keeping with customary law of the sea. Israel's not a signatory to the Law of the Sea Convention. At any rate, we signed deals that demarked our economic waters with Cyprus and with Egypt. We didn't, of course, do so with Lebanon because Lebanon is an enemy state controlled by Iran, and so we have no diplomatic dealings with Iran. But Iran did sign a deal with Cyprus that demarked their economic boundaries, and Israel simply accepted the boundary that the Lebanese had submitted to the UN between Israel and Lebanon as our economic waters boundary. But the minute that Israel did that, Hezbollah, Lebanon, and I think it's necessary to continue referring to Lebanon as Hezbollah, Lebanon, because for some reason in the discourse in Israel in recent years, the security establishment has decided to ignore what it already knows, which is that Hezbollah and Lebanon are one, and pretend, along with the Israeli left and the Americans, that there's some distinction between the two. Just a little background here, parenthetically, in 2008, Hezbollah carried out was essentially a military coup against Lebanon when they took over the communications in the Beirut International Airport. And they essentially besieged the Lebanese armed forces and said, come on, try us if you want to. We're in control of the airport. And rather than fight Hezbollah, which was the only choice it had, if Lebanon and the Lebanese government and the Lebanese armed forces had wished to remain sovereign actors, they caved. They essentially gave Hezbollah any residual control they had of Lebanese affairs after A, Hezbollah murdered Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005 and faced no consequences for the crime, and B, Hezbollah controlled parties won the Lebanese parliamentary elections in 2007. So in 2008, Hezbollah Iran completed their seizure of control over the Lebanese government and the Lebanese parliament and the Lebanese armed forces. And everybody knew this, but the Americans chose to ignore this for various reasons that have to do with convenience and State Department tendencies. But they had nothing to do with Israel's national interests. And Israel, for a long time, insisted, including our security brass, that this distinction that the Americans continued to make between the government of Lebanon and the Lebanese armed forces on the one hand and Hezbollah on the other hand was artificial. But over the past year or two, particularly since the left took power in Israel, the military has gone along with this fiction that there's a Lebanese government that is separate and independent and actually friendly towards Israel. So bearing those in mind, we go back to the negotiations and what Israel got. We negotiated with an imaginary Lebanon that isn't any of those things. And to that Lebanon, which Gantz and Lapid insist we want to strengthen, we've given 10 square kilometers of our territorial waters. That's about, I think somebody said, 3 times the square size of the city of Rishon LeZion. I may be getting it wrong. I may be underestimating the actual size, but it's a very, very large amount of territorial waters that Israel's giving away. We've given away our economic waters, our rights to our natural resources, gas deposits, and other natural resources that have yet to be discovered in our economic waters, in our continental shelf underneath those economic waters. And what did we get in return? Nothing. The Lapid government insists that the Lebanese have recognized our land borders, the buoy line that they call it, but the text of the agreement says we did no such thing. The text of the agreement also says that the Lebanese are allowed to scope out inside of what remains of our territorial waters in relation to gas deposits that may be located along both sides of the border, but Israel is barred from doing that. It actually limits what Israel is able to do as a sovereign state within its truncated sovereign territorial waters. This agreement gives full control over the Kana gas field, which traverses Lebanon and Israel to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, Iran, and it takes it all away from Israel. Israel is supposed to sign some sort of a commercial agreement with Total Energies, which is in control of 60% of the prospecting contract with Lebanon, but Total itself is a hostile entity. It's signed deals with Iran both in 1997 and 2004 and in 2017 to develop Iran's gas fields. It's not at all interested in working with Israel, and we're supposed to be chasing after Total Energies to get economic payouts for our concession to Lebanon, and there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to get them, because there's no guarantee in the contract that we want to agree to with Hezbollah that gives us any way to act if that part of the agreement, which isn't even with Lebanon, is breached by Total or by anybody else. The agreement makes the United States the arbiter of all disputes between Israel and Lebanon, and we're facing right now a U.S. administration that is using this agreement as a carve-out, as a way to give money to Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran, in breach of U.S. sanctions. So there's really no chance that the United States, certainly under a progressive Democrat administration, will ever side with Israel on any of this, and yet rather than retain for ourselves our ability to defend our interests when they're undermined by our enemy state to our north, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Israel is transferring the authority to determine whether we have a right to defend our interests to a foreign power, in this case the United States, and we get no guarantee in return that they're going to look out for our interests, because obviously why would they if we won't? And then finally, this deal itself is sort of an echo of the or a reinstatement of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that the Obama administration did. If you recall, that deal wasn't supposed to be binding on any successor U.S. administration because it wasn't ratified as a treaty by the Senate. It was really just a presidential agreement. And so Obama tried to bind the hands of a future Republican president to require him to go along with this deal, which was opposed by the majority of the American public, by transforming it into a binding Security Council resolution at the UN before it was even brought to the Senate for a vote. And so that's what Obama did. Samantha Power rushed to the UN Security Council and rammed through a Security Council resolution under Article 7 of the Charter, which makes it binding, that transformed Obama's deal with Iran into something that was binding under international law, or at least that they thought that would be the case, and moved forward with it. So here in the deal with Lebanon, Israel doesn't actually sign anything with Lebanon. The deal itself involves Israel writing a letter to the United States, the Lebanese writing a letter to the United States, and then essentially setting out the points of agreement here. They're not with one another, they're with the United States. And secondly, both parties are supposed to then go to the UN Secretary General's office and submit the demarcation of their territorial and economic waters in line with what has been agreed to in this Biden administration mediated deal that gives Hezbollah, Lebanon everything that they want and gives Israel nothing. And so once Israel submits this, at least ostensibly, to the UN, it will be binding on a successor government of Israel. We have elections, as we said at the outset, in 2 weeks, and we don't know who that government is going to be. But it's an attempt to make an end run around the democratic process in Israel to require a government that may come into power in just 3 weeks to continue on with this policy, which undermines Israel's economic rights. I mean, we're losing the Kana gas field that this government wants to just surrender whole hog to Hezbollah is worth what is an assessed value of, I don't know, billions of dollars, certainly billions of dollars, and an initial payout to Lebanon of $500 million. And this is money, as some commentators have noted, some critics of the deal have noted, that's supposed to go to our children and grandchildren. This is their future. The gas in the Eastern Mediterranean is very much a guarantor of Israel's continued economic prosperity, and here we are handing it over to an enemy state for no reason. And we're also, finally, from a strategic perspective, by doing this, we're opening the door at a minimum for Iranian forces to start operating in the Eastern Mediterranean. Right now, we have Iran on our northern border with Hezbollah, on our northern border in Syria, with the Assad regime, both puppet regimes of Iran. And now we're going to put them in the Eastern Mediterranean through this gas deal by giving an Iranian puppet government, Lebanon, Hezbollah, our economic waters and the right to operate along those, inside of those waters. So this is a really, really, really big deal, and the government has been trying to play it down. The American media is barely covering the story, and in fact, to the extent the Israeli media is playing it up, they're playing it up as a diplomatic triumph for Lapid and attacking Netanyahu, who Lapid and Gantz are accusing of cooperating with Hezbollah, which they claim opposes the deal, which of course is untrue because Hezbollah supports the deal. So they're actually, it would seem, collaborating with Hezbollah by pushing a deal that empowers Hezbollah against Israel. But what they're using as their talking point is this accusation that by opposing this deal, which is so fantastic and supports all of the moderates in Lebanon against Hezbollah, that Netanyahu and the right are actually standing with Hezbollah against Israel. And these are complete lies, but it shows the level of insanity of the discourse in Israel that's dominated by a press that supports the post-nationalist, post-Zionist Islamic bloc of parties that's running in the election and that now controls the government. And that really brings us to Iran. What we're seeing today really is a miracle in the streets of Iran, which is that protesters, really revolutionaries, I don't think you can call them protesters anymore. They're not simple demonstrations. They're revolutionary acts, whether violent or non-violent. They're blowing up Basij headquarters. Basij is the secret police that in previous waves of protests in Iran have been deployed by the regime to murder, suppress, and conduct mass arrests of protesters to end the protests. And now the Basij are fleeing because they're being killed by the protesters, by the revolutionaries, and their headquarters are being blown up. They're being replaced on the ground by some reports that I've seen from Iran by Revolutionary Guard Corps officers and soldiers that are in civilian gear. They're also bringing in Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon to defend the regime, and Iranian-controlled militias from Iraq to defend the regime against the Iranian people who are rising up in revolution against it. And there have been a lot of attempts to cubbyhole the protests, say it's about women's rights, say it's about, what else have they said? They're saying it's about ethnic rights, and really they're separatist movements of the Azerbaijanis, of the Baluchis, of the Kurds. None of this is true, and the messaging discipline of all of the revolutionaries on the streets, whether the Awaz Arabs or the Baluchis or the Azerbaijanis or the Kurds or the Persians in the streets of Tehran, has been extraordinary. This is a revolution. They want to overthrow the regime. They want freedom. They want freedom for men. They want freedom for women. They want freedom for ethnic minorities. They want freedom for the Persian plurality. They want freedom for Iran. They're not talking about taking apart Iran. They're talking about overthrowing a regime that has destroyed Iran from the inside. And what's notable here is they're opening up the door for Israel not only to bring down a regime that threatens us existentially, but also to take out some of the installations that threaten us existentially. Last night I saw a call of the revolutionaries calling in Natanz, which is a city that has one of the most important nuclear uranium enrichment installations in Iran, that has been repeatedly subjected to what appear to be sabotage attacks to block and to postpone and to delay Iran's ability to cross the nuclear threshold. What works out in Natanz, according to the revolutionaries, there are also biological weapons installations. And the revolutionaries have asked for the world to come in and block Iran from using the biological weapons that they have in Natanz against them. And I think that this is an opening, obviously, for Israel to act to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power and from becoming a non-conventional power, whether through biological, chemical warheads, and also through their massive missile arsenal, which, by the way, large portions of which they're shipping to Russia to be used against Ukrainian civilians in Kiev and other places. So, we have our enemies, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, Hezbollah now sending forces away from Lebanon to Iran. They're actually on the defensive, and they have this. And so, first of all, in terms of that, this is when you strike. When they are in retreat, that is when you do what you need to do in order to defend your national interests. And Israel, instead of doing that, it's being almost completely silent in the face of these extraordinary acts of revolutionary opposition in Iran. Israel's doing nothing to support the protesters, the demonstrators, the saboteurs in Iran, at least not overtly, and it's hard to see that Israel's doing very much covertly, but Israel also is empowering the regime through this gas deal with Iran. It's not nothing that when the deal was announced, the Iranian media posted it on front the page of all of the Iranian newspapers because they wanted the Iranian people, who are now in open revolt, to see how powerful and strong the regime is, with a huge picture from, across the front page of the newspapers of Hassan Nasrallah, who everybody understands is the head of the Revolutionary Guards Legion in Lebanon, declaring victory over the Zionist entity through the gas deal. And this is what Israel is doing. We're providing gifts to the regime. We're telling the people of Iran that we're so scared of the regime that they're fighting and they're giving their lives to bring down, that we're actually giving them our natural resources, and the natural resources that were supposed to be here for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This is a horrible message to be sending, even if we are providing help of one sort or another secretly, and it's so devastating for Israel. But the other thing that we have to realize is that this really is a miracle. It's a miracle, and these people need to be defended and protected and upheld and supported publicly in every possible way we can, whether as Israelis or as Americans or as British or as anybody. I mean, they are standing up against one of the most dangerous regimes in the world. The largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world has been since it was founded in 1979 in the Islamic Revolution. If they're successful in bringing down this regime, as my colleague and friend David Wormser said to me a few days ago, this will be the most significant development in the Middle East since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. It really is. The Iranian regime is behind so much of the terror and mayhem that we've experienced, whether on 9/11, where you had the terrorists went through Iran on their way to the United States, and Hezbollah was training a lot of the Al-Qaeda operatives. This was in the 9/11 report. I'm not making any of this up. Iran has its hand and its tentacles in almost every single major act of international terrorism in the world. It's been waging proxy wars against Israel and the United States for 40 years in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Thousands of U.S. GIs gave their lives because they were killed by Iranian armaments and Iranian armed and trained militias. This is simply the truth. If Iran goes away, so much would change in the world. I mean, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, even if it had been fully successful, wouldn't have had as much of an impact on the Middle East and on global security as the overthrow of the Iranian regime. Not even close. Same is the case with Afghanistan. Iran has a finger in every pot of international mayhem, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, missile proliferation, and on and on and on down the list. Drug dealing, drug sales, narcotics trafficking worldwide. All of these things are on the line in 2 weeks on November 1st when Israelis go to the polls. How are we going to handle this? We see how things are being handled today. If we think that they should be handled differently, I certainly do, then we have to hope for a different outcome in the elections. So without further ado, I want to say hello to a member of Knesset, Simcha Rothman. Simcha, thank you so much for joining me today in the news hour. I really am happy to have you here.
Shalom, shalom, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Finally, we've been talking about it for a while, and now with 2 weeks left to the elections, I thought it would be an excellent time to sit down and talk to you for a few minutes about your party and about what your plans are for the Knesset and the state of the race. So, if you want to start, I would like to start with how you look at this race. I mean, from an overall perspective, we haven't seen much movement in the polls. The right wing bloc, which includes your party and Likud and Shas and Agudat Yisrael, the two ultra orthodox parties, all of the polls have shown almost no movement between 59 and 62 mandates for the right wing bloc, and then the left wing bloc getting similarly 61 to 59, as left wing Arab bloc getting 69 to 51 votes. And why do you? How do you look at it? How do you, and also how do you explain that there seems to be so little movement in public opinion in the polls?
So first, we need to know that there has been a large movement because the four parties that you mentioned, Likud and ourselves and Shas and Yadut Torah, in the current Knesset, they got 52 seats. So the fact that now we're talking about some 62, some 61, some 60, but we do see a little bit of an increase. But the fact that we're talking about 10 mandates, it's almost 10%, 8% of the population that moved to those four parties is almost unheard of in such a short period of time. And that's to demonstrate what happened in the past year and a half. The past year and a half in Israel, and I think the major story is what's going on with Naftali Bennett's party, Yamina, which now is they changed the name so many times. I don't really know what the name is currently. Maybe as we record, they will change the name another time until it's going online on the air. But those basically went to 5 or 6 different parties, and the votes went all around, and most of the votes came back to the right-wing bloc. And what's going on with Ayelet Shaked and the remains of this skeleton of a party, Yamina, now together with Beit Yehudi, it might determine the outcome of the elections if we are on the safe side of 61, 62, and maybe 63. Because votes from the right that go and try to help Ayelet Shaked pass the threshold will actually go to waste, because there is no chance of Ayelet Shaked and Beit Yehudi passing the threshold, and those votes are very, very valuable to securing right-wing government, and that's why we are now a little bit stuck.
One of the sources of frustration for me has been seeing how Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked really managed to pervert the discourse inside of the religious Zionist community, of which we're both members, and where you have people who look at parties almost like hairstyles. Well, today I want it up, tomorrow I want it down, or maybe even like you would maybe want to choose a wife or a husband. I need somebody who exactly suits me in every possible way. And I'm more, Simcha Rothman didn't serve in a combat unit in the army, and therefore I'm not going to vote for him because I was in the paratroopers. or Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's in your sister party, Otzma Yehudit. Well, he in the past he was affiliated with Meir Kahana's Kach movement, and therefore I don't want to have anything to do with them, and I'd rather vote for a party that's sitting in a coalition with a Muslim Brotherhood. And there seems to be this incredible kind of uh, rush from reality on the part of so many people in the religious Zionist community that they think that they can just have it all, that they can feel, like they're the enlightened ones, that they're cool, that they're whatever, and that they're and that therefore their vote is really just a fashion statement. I mean, how do you look at these voters, and everybody knows who they are? We talk about them endlessly. They live in my neighborhood in Efrat, in Petach Tikva, Givat Shmuel, and all sorts of other places. And they just seem to really, really want to be progressive. And yet all of their interests are in the right wing.
That's exactly the point, because I believe that if we would have this talk and talk about issues of kashrut and issues of the exact path of mitzvot observance, whatever, and the exact, you said hairstyle, what exactly the type of hairstyle or not, or hair cover, you can have debates from today until after elections and maybe even more, and you can find all this kind of differences in the Tilumi, in the religious Zionists, in the modern Orthodox, and there is a difference between modern Orthodox and the Tilumi, and Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Cook, and you can have these discussions forever, but you can have this discussion when after you are thrown into sea, because the Muslim Brotherhood wants to have a Muslim country, an Islamic state all around the state of Israel, or you will lose to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, to Iran. So those kind of, or you won't have a justice system that works, or any issues that we deal with. I'm not saying it's not important how to deal with Giyur. It's a very important issue. I'm not saying it's not important how to deal with kashrut and how to deal with the difference and what is the exact religious way to look at the founding of the state of Israel. Is it part of the redemption process, or it's just whatever? It's very important. I'm not trying to minimize the impact and the importance of those questions. But if you don't understand that you're having this inner debates within your own shul, when there is someone trying to demolish the shul itself, you have people just waiting to evacuate settlements or communities from Judea and Samaria. You can even have the debate if to call them settlements or communities, but the people who have this debate wants to destroy them. Doesn't matter how you want to call them, or it's really. I don't understand how can people look at those differences and say, oh, I don't like Ben-Gvir, I don't like Avi Maoz. Okay, you don't like him. This is a big tent with also number-wise. And you have to remember, when Shaked and Bennett, they were in full power. They were the most popular people in the Tilumi and also in the whole right-wing side in Israeli politics. She was a very successful justice minister. He wanted to be. He was a minister. He wanted to be a defense minister, and they were very, very popular. They're very strong, and they didn't pass this threshold, and they lost 4 seats for the right wing, and they brought us 3 years of instability and political instability, and this past year and a half government. It all happened because of people voting to parties that does not pass the threshold. So I am all for it. And we got into our party people from Efrat, I myself from the Gush. We're not made of the same exact ideological materials in our parties. There are differences. And we try to cater to as broader audience as we can. But you cannot make this fashion statement, as you said, and ruin it for yourself. It's not for other people. It's for yourself, for your house, for your community, for the Jewish attributes of the state of Israel. that's what's on the line. That's what we saw in the past year and a half.
I mean, and if we want to talk about that a little bit, your signature issue is reform of the legal system. And the head of your party, Bezalel Smotrich, came out yesterday with one of the reforms that you guys are interested in making, which is canceling the law, the sort of catch-all law, breach of trust that can get a politician indicted for, changing his haircut. Right, and we've seen this used over and over and over again to criminalize politics and politicians who are not to the liking of the legal fraternity. It's I think it's in two of the charges against Netanyahu is being accused of breach of trust. So, explain your legal philosophy. I mean, sort of generally, and how, or more to the point, explain how your legal philosophy brought you into politics. And what do you think can be accomplished in the next government if it's formed by the right-wing bloc?
So first, I started dealing with the justice system as a mission 10 years ago. In 2012, I started the Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy, Hebrew name Meshilut, and we offered many changes in the justice system. We did a lot of research, a lot of publicity to the problems and also to the solutions. I wrote a book on it also. I wrote it in 2018. It was published in 2019. So just to put it in context, people are all the time and immediately after the introduction of this plan to cancel the breach of trust. Of course, there are some felonies that we can talk about when we talk about former politicians. We're not offering to cancel bribery. We're not offering to cancel other kinds of misconduct. But the breach of trust is so vague and so you can basically put anything in it that it's a violation. It's really hurting human rights when you can prosecute anyone for anything retroactively and say what you have done is a breach of trust. But when you've done it, you didn't have any way to know that we're going to prosecute you, that it's a felony, that it's problematic. It's so vague. It's if you do something that hurt the public, who is to determine?
So let's talk a little bit more beyond the breach of trust. Let's talk about the problem of Israel's legal fraternity more generally, and how a right-wing conservative government might be able to make some changes that will enact a sort of legal reform that won't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that won't destroy Israel's system of law, but will actually be able to make it better. What are the things that you're looking at? What are the things that are really problematic about the legal fraternity, and how might you fix them?
So we need to understand that Israel, some people might be surprised to know, Israel had a justice system until the 80s. And it had a pretty good justice system until the 80s. The problem was when the left lost the election in 1977. And so there was a switch of power from the elected officials to the court, to the Attorney General office, and to the unelected officials. And they started canceling acts of government and canceling laws and interfering in more and more policy calls in immigration.
Wait, what you're saying is that after the left lost the political majority, they simply burrowed into the public bureaucracy to essentially empty out the powers of the elected leaders so that they could maintain power through bureaucratic fiat because they couldn't have it through elections. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and through the justice system. And we see the increase of power of the justice system as the more power the right got on the polls in the Knesset, in the government, less power was there in the government, and it went to the courts, and it went to the unelected officials in different governments. And criminalizing politics was part of it, because if in Israel, and some people that are listening to us in the US might find it very strange, but in Israel, through this breach of trust law, a minister was accused of appointing people that he wanted to jobs. Now, there was no law forbidding the politician to do those appointments, but they said, oh, if you make appointment based on political affiliation, that's a breach of trust. Now, everyone have done it until him. Some people would say that even after him, some appointments are political of nature, but he was indicted and he was from the Likud, because why should the Likud have the power to appoint his people, the people that are sharing the same ideology and will pursue the same policy? And you see, so we need to change it.
So, what given the politicization of the Israeli legal system, the courts, the attorney general, the state prosecution, what do you suggest? What is your concept of reforming the system, and how and what specifically could be done uh, to fix this so that we can have a restoration of our democratic regime in Israel?
So we introduced a plan, a full plan. I hope it will be also available in English, but it's a very thorough plan to reform the system. We're talking about splitting the roles of the Attorney General in Israel. It's one person who is unelected, who holds tremendous amount of power, no comparison to anywhere in the world, to change the way we elect our judges. And we need to have we need to really have to restart the justice system, because the public trust in the justice system in Israel has been declining for decades now. It's low, it's the lowest point ever, and it's not just about, okay, so it's a battle between the elected officials and the court system. Oh, it's a battle about powers that the regular average Joe shouldn't care about. No, because when you don't have a functioning justice system and you are facing illegal arrest, you don't have anywhere to go to. If you want to sue in a regular court someone who did not evict your apartment, when you're renting an apartment, you're renting out an apartment, you cannot go to the court because the court is swamped, because the court is dealing with many issues the court should not deal with. And so we see it, and you cannot complain. You cannot. A judge can basically do whatever he wants. He can actually accept bribery, and there were cases with judges who were changing illegally the protocols or getting bribery, and they weren't kicked out from the office, because the system is very good in safeguarding the system, not so good in safeguarding the law. And Israel needs a justice system that works for the public and not against the public, and not against the elected officials, which has been the vector of the justice system in the past 20 or 30 or 40 years.
You know, one of the things that we've seen with the Attorney General's office, with the state prosecution's office, is that and with the court itself, is that they've really gone to war against Jewish ritual observance or conservative Jewish practices in the public sphere. So this has specifically caused the persecution of the religious Zionist and the ultra-Orthodox publics that are barred from carrying out public activities that in a way that aligns with their religious convictions, whether it's separate hours in public swimming pools for men and women, or separate concerts for men and women because of restrictions on ingathering of both sexes in the same thing. And you know, the concept, the basic argument has been, well, you know, this undermines the freedom of men to be at concerts with women and of women to be at concerts with men. How do you relate to the claim that having these kinds of events undermines freedom of association in general? And how would your party go about um, dealing with this dispute between people who say there's a general good and people who say, you know, all sectors of society should be able to have services that fit their individual needs as a community, or specific communal needs?
So first, one must know that the Knesset has decided this issue. When the Knesset enacted the law, which is problematic in many other ways because of the tension between public good and private property, or freedom of association, freedom of contract. It's a problematic law, but the Knesset has decided to pass this anti-discrimination law. When you're talking about the public services should not discriminate in any way. But when you're talking about private people, private businesses, and you enforce them your views, right or wrong, it's problematic from a freedom point of view. But the Knesset had specifically decided that separation between men and women, because Israeli society, and it's not only the ultra-Orthodox or the Orthodox or the Dati or whatever, it's also the Arabs. In Israel, separation between men and women is sometimes essential for people to be able to go to swimming pools. There are people, Arabs again and Jews, that won't go to a swimming pool if it's a mixed swimming pool. If you say it's a discrimination to have separate hours for men and women, and also, by the way, many women will not go to, many secular women will not go to a gym if it's not separate only for women. It goes all the way, and in Israel is specifically decided in the law that separation between men and women is not by itself a discrimination, and the court just disregarded it because he wanted to impose his own views that apparently is different from the point of the legislator, and that brings us back to the question: is the court supposed to work according to the law and to the decision that's being made somewhere else in the legislature, by the public, by the government? There are ways for the Israeli society to say what kind of reforms they want to make, what kind of ideas they want to adopt. And that's election. We're going to have election in 2 weeks. If you want to push forward for some specific direction, you have a party to go there. And what the courts in Israel are doing is just ignoring the outcome of the election and claiming they know better than anyone else. That has to stop. And the program that we introduced supposed to take Israel to this place. And the most important thing is, not everyone should agree to any specific part of the legal program that we put forward. But we need to have this discussion. It's a serious discussion. We need to make it with a clean slate, not think about Netanyahu, not think about Lapid, not think about personal issues, not thinking about right or left affiliation because tomorrow someone else wins. We need to build a good system for the public, for the citizens of the State of Israel, and for the existence of the State of Israel.
Let me just give you one last question. You know, a lot of people, when they say why they don't feel comfortable voting for your party, they say, well, Bezalel Smotrich is much more conservative religiously than I am, and he's going to impose he wants to impose a system that's going to be overly restrictive in Israeli public life. He's going to, or in Israeli religious observance, he's going to undermine the ability of more progressive or egalitarian streams to develop in the Orthodox community. He's not representative of where I am religiously, and if he gets power, then he's going to introduce all kinds of things that are going to undermine my freedoms religiously. How do you look at those concerns, which are really a reflection of a lot of the media coverage of Bezalel Smotrich over the years? What is your response to them?
So I think really, as you put the finger exactly on the issue, the media coverage. That's where the problem starts, and that's where the problems end. We have a platform. And Bezalel Smotrich by himself, he was a minister of transportation. People can check. Did he use? Merav Michaeli was a minister of transportation for a very short time. She couldn't, and she trying to impose her own views against Israeli status quo without the support of the Knesset, without the democratic process, just for the sake of I will push forward my views, the way public transportation in Israel should work. I don't care about the drivers, I don't care about the expenses, I don't care about anything. I'm running forward. The right in Israel,
You're talking about operating public transportations on Shabbat.
of course, and against the status quo that has been in Israel since its founding. But Bezalel Smotrich, he did not went. He said, "Okay, now I am a religious Zionist. I'm going to go to Haifa, where buses operates on Shabbat, and I will close it down because I feel it's not a good halachically or religiously." We don't want to change Israeli freedoms and Israeli citizens' right and impose our own views on them. It's not something that the Religious Zionist Party ever did. And when they were in power and they weren't in power, it doesn't matter. It's not within our agenda. We're not, and it's basically a media coverage issue. It's not a real issue of policy. You can see how everyone in which in his power behaved. Of course, we think that State of Israel should be much more connected to its Jewish heritage. I think the education system had gone south. We used to have much more Jewish education in regular school. I'm not talking about the T school. I'm not talking about religious education. I'm talking about Jewish education. I'm talking about people that I'm getting complaints from secular parents saying we don't learn Tanakh in school. My children go out of school. They don't know anything about Tanakh.
Okay, well, where are you going to spend the next 2 weeks until the elections?
So I'm running around, and actually, I'm glad to say that in these elections we do have more English presence than last elections because, and I'm actually the head of the Anglo part of the campaign. Because
well, it almost requires me to say "oh dear," but actually, your English is pretty good. We were joking before we started this interview that we'd see whether you deserved your high grade in your English matriculation exams from high school, and you're okay. You're okay.
I can't do anything about my Israeli accent, but I try to.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, I wish you the best of luck, Simcha, and to your party, the Religious Zionist Party. I think we definitely need stability in this country, and we definitely need strong Zionist leadership for this country to reinstate the democratic norms that we deserve and that we require for our very survival. So I appreciate very much the work you've been doing in the Knesset and previous to that, and let's just hope for the best. And yes, if you're watching this show from the United States or Britain or any other place, I fully am on board with Simcha's call. Come make Aliyah. Efrat is filled with new Olim from America, and there's always room for 10,000 more. So come along, and thanks so much, Simcha, for coming on the show. Take care.
Thank you for having me.